Today on the MrMaple Show podcast, Tim and Sean count down the top 25 Ginkgos of 2024. Customer's choice.
Howdy, and welcome to the MrMaple Show. Today, we're bringing you the top 25 Ginkgos of 2024. I'm Tim.
And I'm Sean.
And y'all, this is one that people really loved last year, was our top 25 Ginkgos of 2023. So we thought we'd bring it to you again this year. It's changed quite a bit on the top sellers on the Ginkgos. This is the Consumer's Choice Awards for the Ginkgo trees on MrMaple.com. These are the trees that you picked by purchasing trees on Mr. Maple. Now, some of these, if we had in higher quantities, could have put up higher numbers. But Ginkgos, they're awesome. I mean, they were like a prehistoric tree. You know, they were around when the dinosaurs were here. If you go back, they find them in fossils. They're easy to grow. They hadn't changed much since back then, according to the fossil records. And they go to bright yellows in the fall. Some of the best yellow fall colors. They can really add a lot to your Japanese maple garden.
Yeah, and I just love what you can do with them. In fact, I remember back that when you and I did a trip and we got to go see, what was it, the Ginkgo fence or the Ginkgo wall. I mean, just more than you can do and then just stick it in your garden. There's a lot that you can do with these.
Oh yeah, what they did at the Ginkgos at the Paul Senior Botanical Garden there in Kernersville, North Carolina, is just outstanding. They just sort of tied them together and did such a unique. I mean, Ginkgos, they can be trained so easily. They're one of the most trainable trees that are out there. Their hormones are very different than your, more complex hormones today. They're very more simple, more basic hormone structure. And because of that, they'll go whichever direction you stake them. And I've seen before a Ginkgo that was weaved into a basket.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
It was just insane seeing a Ginkgo weaved into a basket. I've seen them being put up as an espalier against a building where you can just train them that's at the National Arboretum in Virginia. And I guess it's in DC. And it is amazing to be able to see how easy Ginkgos can be trained. Now, Ginkgos are easy to grow. They typically want 4 to 6 hours of sunlight at least. And they also want good drainage, and they want lime to be added so they can get more alkaline in the soil, so they can get more established and take up water and nutrients more efficiently. So lime isn't really a fertilizer, but it just sort of sets the stage for the plant to take up water and nutrients better.
Let's go ahead and jump right in. This is the customer's choice of the top 25 Ginkgos of 2024. And coming in at number 25, we have Ginkgo Baloba Akebono.
Now, this is an upright, narrow male selection. When I say male selection, that means that Akebono is one of those types that does not typically produce fruit. And the fruit on Ginkgo trees begins to smell after it's been sitting there for a while, just like fruit on an apple tree, but it smells a little bit worse on a Ginkgo. So people often prefer the male selections of the Ginkgos because what you're looking for are those ornamental traits, and Akebono has that narrow form.
You're looking about 15 foot and 20 years on this tree with those greens. But like you say, what these are known for is when it goes to that fall color, those bright yellows on this tree, absolutely wonderful.
And this one fits in a more narrow space. It's one of those trees that gets a lot of height to it, not a lot of width. So that gives you something to play with out there in the garden. And with those yellows in the fall and those maiden hair like leaves, it's one of those trees that just adds a lot to the landscape and garden.
And then coming in here at 24, we have Ginkgo Baloba Pendula.
Now, Ginkgo Baloba Pendula has a more cascading form. It has very horizontal growth, and then that horizontal growth then can often grow downward. Pendula means essentially weeping, and this is one of the more weeping selections of the male Ginkgos.
And don't be surprised with this one. It might seem like at an earlier age it's grown more columnar, but as it ages, it'll grow out and have more of that weeping habit.
Yeah, I mean, the hormones on this one typically have that more weeping style to it. If you stake this one up at an early age, you can get a lot of height to it before you get that more pendulous structure. I do recommend just letting this thing cascade. and really sprawl out. If it is starting to get a little too much height to it, simply trim out that central leader, and that tree is going to naturally start growing more horizontal, and then that more weeping habit that Pendula was selected for.
And then coming in here at number 23, we have Ginkgo Baloba Chase Manhattan.
Now, this is a unique selection. It has one of the more small leaves than many of the other ginkgo trees. They have a beautiful specimen of this at UT Gardens in Knoxville. And that's where I fell in love with this tree, just seeing those really small leaves and that nice upright habit. It gives her a lot of really good form. That small leaf makes this a unique specimen that can be used for bonsai. It gives a unique texture in the landscape because its leaf is so much smaller, but it has that traditional ginkgo leaf, but it's just smaller than the rest.
That's what I like about this. You mentioned that it's an upright, and that's what really makes it stand out, are those small leaves on an upright. Usually when you see those smaller leaves, you don't think of a more upright columnar type tree.
Now, y'all, next up, coming in at number 22, we've got Ginkgo Biloba Leela. This is a not so common dwarf compact form of a male ginkgo selection.
Now, this one I think is great because it's great for containers. You can move them around. You can use them in you can use them in fairy gardens. Just a great tree. And again, like all of these, those fall colors, those yellows that they get, unbelievable.
Now, ginkgos, you can actually turn their leaves into ginkgo tea. And what you do is you let the leaves fall off the tree, and they're yellow, and then you let them dry out. And then that dries to like a brown, and then you go in and you crunch that up, and that's what you make the ginkgo tea out of. And a dwarf like this, you can actually grow that on your patio, out on your deck, and then grow that in a container, and then make ginkgo tea, from the tree you've got sitting on your porch. So such a cool thing you can do. Ginkgo is supposed to be really good for your memory. There's a lot of good health benefits for Ginkgo biloba, and that is actually from the leaves, and people often think it's from the fruit. But y'all, you can do that with a male ginkgo tree that doesn't stink.
So moving right along, coming in at number 21, we have Ginkgo Biloba Green Pagoda.
Now, Green Pagoda is one of those upright forms that stays very dense and compact and a tight structure, and that gives it a very pleasing appearance out there in the landscape.
Looking at about 8 to 10 foot and about 10 years on this tree. That pagoda, that green pagoda, what I really like about this one, again, is it's that smaller, but you got that upright shape to it that kind of balls out. Really, really neat tree.
And if it was that 8 to 10 feet in height, it could be 8 to 10 foot in width as well, being about equally as tall as it is wide. So it's a very different shape than something like we were talking about earlier with Akabono. Green Pagoda coming in at number 21. Y'all, we've offered a lot of ginkgos on MrMaple, and that's our goal, is to be able to offer ginkgos like we do our Japanese maples. You find the ones that people really like, you offer them in really large numbers, and then you try to offer as many other varieties available as possible so people can be able to grow them, compare them, and see what it means to be able to grow one of these living fossils.
And what's great about these, like you talk about the Japanese maples, great companion plants to Japanese maples, and a great to add those into your fall colors. So if you have some of your Japanese maples that go to those reds and those oranges, to put this yellow in there during the fall, make your entire garden pop.
Now, coming at number 20, we've got one that was in our top 5 before, likely. We're talking about Ginkgo biloba Jade butterflies. And Jade butterflies is an upright ginkgo in that 10 to 12 foot in height in 10 years kind of size range. And it stays very dense and compact. And the leaves are said to look like little jade butterflies.
What I like about this one is that its growth habit is very vase shaped. So it's a little bit different than what else is out there with the ginkgos. But just an excellent. And I'm quite surprised looking at this list, seeing that it came in all the way at number 20. I mean, I was thinking that, when I looked at this list, I was thinking surely this was going to be a lot further up on the list.
Yeah, I mean, it's typically one of our more popular ginkgo trees, so it's unusual to see it drop so far down to number 20. Ginkgos, they've been so popular in gardening for years. Thomas Jefferson actually planted some ginkgos out at the University of Virginia years ago. And Matt and I went to go visit University of Virginia and find these ginkgos that Thomas Jefferson planted himself. And it's crazy to be able to see these trees that are just, we're talking several 100-year-old tree here in the United States on a ginkgo tree. And it's crazy that some of our founding fathers not only loved gardening, but they also loved ginkgos.
That's awesome. Coming in at number 19, we have Ginkgo Baloba, Go Kusaba.
Now, this is a selection that was introduced into the nursery trade by Brian Upchurch. He got it from Mr. Ishii in Japan. It's a small leaf selection, and we're really, still confused about this tree, and I think Brian is too, and Mr. Ishii. Brian brought this back from Japan, had Mr. Ishii write out the label, Go Kusaba, and then brought it back to the United States. Real small leaf form, really dense and compact. And then the next trip, he went over and asked Mr. Ishii about Go Kusaba a little bit more, and he said, Go Kusaba? I don't know that ginkgo. So, it's one of those things where everyone's a little confused at what happened, but this is such a small leaf dwarf. The leaves are smaller than Chase Manhattan. It's one of the smallest selections. The leaves can be almost pinky sized on some of the new growth, and an excellent tree for small conifer gardens, fairy gardens, conifer troughs, and it'd be a really cool bonsai, but it's really rare.
And this is what I would think. This is probably one of the slower growers of all of these on this list.
Oh, definitely. And I do recommend good drainage. A lot of dwarf conifers, and ginkgo is considered a conifer because it is a gymnosperm, and all of their other close relatives are gone. But small dwarf selections of ginkgos, make sure you don't overwater them. I mean, an upright form like a Jade butterflies or an akabono, they're going to need a little more water than some of these slower growing dwarf selections. And if you overwater some of these dwarfs, you can actually kill them. You don't want to cause root rot on these trees. Remember, they're slow growing, they're dwarf, they don't need as much water as some of your faster growing, more upright selections.
Okay, coming in at number 18, we have, I'm actually surprised. I would expect this to be even higher on the list as well, but we have Jagged Jade.
Yeah, this is basically what I think of a polyploid or a tetraploid of a ginkgo. I mean, it's definitely got a lot more chromosomes in it that I would think than your typical ginkgo. It looks like you took a ginkgo, you hit it with some chemicals, and out became this unique ginkgo that had more chromosomes. I mean, it's got a thicker leaf. The fall color is slightly a little bit different too, a little bit lighter yellow. It's something that we haven't found on many ginkgo selections. And this just has a real jagged leaf to it as well. Very unique and different, but it is very slow growing.
And it's a sport off of Jade butterflies.
Yeah, and it gets about 6 to 8 foot in 10 years. And again, don't overwater it, but it has a really nice regal structure and upright form and thick branching as well. And that's often a characteristic of plants that have more ploidy, those extra chromosomes. I'm just assuming this has those more chromosomes. We haven't tested it ourselves, but if you've seen the extra ploidy in daylilies, you've seen the extra ploidy in a lot of these other plants, you begin to recognize and see what has these unique characteristics. In Japanese maples, we're talking like Rugose, Ruby Ridge, Peveali.
And now we're coming in on number 17 on a variegated. We got Ginkgo Baloba Sunstream.
Now, Sunstream, I think one time I got this and someone had put sunscreen on the name. Sunstream is the correct name. And it is a really nice green, upright ginkgo tree. They get some really nice yellow-green variegation that's striped in each and every leaf very differently on every leaf.
And when it first leaves out, you may not see that variegation, but as you go into summer, that variegation is going to show itself, and it's going to show itself pretty much all summer long. You're going to see that yellow and green variegation.
And it's very important to try to keep these original names and keep them as accurate as we can. But with the Sunstream, I wouldn't even try to put it out there as sunscreen. That's just a complete typo. That's just a complete typo. But the cool thing is about these variegated ginkgos is it just gives you a different leaf color on a ginkgo tree. Almost, there's not a lot of variation found in ginkgos because they are so basic in their structures and so basic in their hormones. And then when you start to find these differences like this variegation, it's something that's very, very special. And this variegation can be unstable. I would compare it to something like a rainbow, where if you see branches that are totally green, I often recommend on pruning those out and letting that the variegated branches thrive and flourish on the tree as best as possible. I have heard accounts, though, of the green branches showing variegation the following year. And so, you never have exact rules when it comes to plants. They always seem to break them.
And coming in at number 16, we're staying with the variegation with Snow Cloud, or also known as Frosty.
Yeah, I mean, this is a slow-growing, extremely stable variegated ginkgo tree. The most stable variegated ginkgo and the most consistently variegated ginkgo of any of them. And it has a very cloud-like variegation on every leaf.
And I think this one, if we had more of them and offered more of them, probably more have sold, because this is one, when you walk through and you see one of these with that frosted white variegation on it, it stands out like no other tree.
Now, in hotter climates, you may need to give snow cloud some protection from the hot afternoon sun. This is one that is very, very special. I mean, it's got so much white variegation on it, you almost think it's fake. And it still has some amazing yellow fall colors as well. But morning sun, afternoon shade, again, trying to give it at least 4 to 6 hours of sunlight is really going to give you the best ideal growing conditions for this ginkgo. And like many of the dwarf selections, you don't overwater these ginkgos that are variegated.
Okay, moving right along, coming in at number 15, we have Ginkgo Baloba, Princeton Gold.
Now, Princeton Gold is a selection that has a very nice rounded out canopy. It has one of those like perfect street tree style shapes. And the other, I think the trademark name on this is Princeton Century. It was patented years ago, and the patents since went out, and a lot of people were just producing it under the non-trademark name Princeton Gold. And it is a solid upright male selection with a beautiful form for the garden.
And you're looking about 25 foot in about 15 years. Great, great tree.
Now, one of the things I love about ginkgos is many of the maples, with the exception of something like the coral barks like Sangukaku, many of them, the maples, go to more oranges and reds. I mean, right now, there's not one ginkgo that goes to a color other than a shade of yellow. And because of that, you can pair this with your Japanese maple garden so well for those fall colored plantings. And green throughout the year contrasts well with many of your red Japanese maples. And then when the fall comes in and lights up, it's dynamic. And I've even had some people who have large ginkgos in their gardens who have Ginkgo parties based on when the ginkgos drop their leaves in the garden. And those ginkgos drop their leaves and they create like a carpet on the garden that is bright yellow and is beautiful. And people will put tables out and throw big lavish parties celebrating the fall color of the ginkgos.
And that's what's interesting, I think, also about ginkgos is that you talk about when that fall color and then you get that carpet, is that ginkgo trees, the leaves, they're almost all like connected in a way that when it's like, okay, it's time to drop, they all seem to drop at the exact same time.
Yeah, I mean, they say that from when the first leaf drops, within 24 hours, every leaf on the ginkgo tree has dropped to the ground.
And that's how you get that carpet. You get that. So while you have all those fresh yellow fall color and they all drop like that, that carpet you get, just, there's nothing like it. Nothing like it.
I remember going through the temples in Kyoto and seeing how they paired their ginkgos. I mean, ginkgos aren't native to Japan. They actually come from China and Korea, and they put them at their Japanese temples. And it's so amazing to be able to see that yellow fall color contrasting with those Japanese maples. And then when they drop and create that carpet on the ground, it adds just a whole different dimension to the garden.
Okay, coming in at number 14, we have Ginkgo Baloba, Magyar.
Now, Magyar is another upright form. This is a street tree male that is easy to grow, very beautiful, and it's one of the more fast, vigorous forms of any of the ginkgo trees. Sometimes it can grow 2 to 3 feet of growth in 1 year, which is quite vigorous for a ginkgo tree, which are typically a little slower growing.
Has more of a pyramidal form, and you're, like you say, that vigorous growing, but you're looking about 20 foot in about 10 to 12 years.
And that makes a good statement tree out there in the landscape, a good shade tree. Now, ginkgos, they're extremely heat tolerant. We've always talked about giving them at least 4 to 6 hours of sun, and that's because many of y'all who listen to the MrMaple Show have Japanese maple gardens. But ginkgos, they can handle that more sunny situation in hotter climates where many of the Japanese maples can't, especially the non-variegated forms. And that means you've got a beautiful tree for that sunnier spot in your garden that can give you that phenomenal yellow fall color. If you go down to Charleston, South Carolina, which I believe is like a zone 10B/11 around that time, around that frame, ginkgo's thriving, doing well down there in full sun. So they're very heat tolerant, they're salt tolerant, they're pollution tolerant, they're drought tolerant. They're easy to grow for many gardens. And Magyar, it does that with a nice, vigorous form.
Okay, coming in at number 13, we have Chris's Dwarf, a.k.a. Munchkin.
Yeah, whichever you call this, they're the same plant, Munchkin and Chris's Dwarf. It's a small leaf, more vigorous, slower growing. I know that sounds crazy, but it's a dwarf compact form that gets out there quickly at an early age and then gets very dense with age. Almost like a Seiho for ginkgos. I mean, that's probably the best way to describe it. But I'm telling you, it's a really awesome tree to grow because it's so beautiful and it's dense compact form.
Great for containers. Again, great for fairy gardens. And it's crazy you say that. More vigorous, but you're only looking at 3 to 2 foot.
In 10 years.
In 10 years.
Exactly. And it gets out there quickly. I think one of the guys who originally put the name Munchkin on it is now calling it Mighty Munchkin. And the guy who put the name Chris's Dwarf is still calling it Chris's Dwarf. But it's been known as Munchkin, Mighty Munchkin, and Chris's Dwarf. All three, exact same tree. It's very confusing in the trade, but amazing tree for people to grow. And it's one that's very sought out by collectors. Many of these ginkgos are available on MrMaple.com. If they're not currently available, you can sign up for our weekly emails. That's typically where they're going to be released through. But you can also go to MrMaple.com and click Notify Me to be notified when an individual cultivar becomes available again on our website.
Okay, coming in at number 12, we have Ginkgo Baloba Golden Globe. And as that name says, kind of that golden globe, that globe, you got that dense, round upright, just a really killer tree.
Yeah, and Golden Globe, I think, is the trademark name. We've been we've been able to have many of these at our Buckholtz farm, I should say, that have the trademark capability to be able to call it the Golden Globe. The cultivar name on this is actually JFS UGA2, because this is a selection that was found by Dr. Durr growing down on the street at UGA, the University of Georgia. They have a lot of ginkgos planted as street trees down through there, and one of them had just had really good form, and it was a male selection. And Dr. Durr, who's very famous for writing the Woody Ornamental Landscape, basically Bible that people use to learn horticulture across the United States, he's the one that introduced this. He's the one that found the selection, put a name on it, and it's been trademarked under the name Golden Globe.
I'm glad he went with Golden Globe and it didn't stay, because how would you like to take that order? Yeah, well, I'd like to get one of those AG. Yeah,
I mean, the trademark names are always crazy. And then being able to use the trademark name such as Golden Globe, it's so much better than using JFS UGA2. I mean, you think about Moonrise, the untrademarked name, the actual registered cultivar name is MUN001. So much better to call it Moonrise than MUN0001. So JFS UGA2, a.k.a. Golden Globe, awesome selection.
Okay, coming in at number 11, we have Ginkgo Baloba ChiChi.
Now, ChiChi is a grafted male form that creates these stalactite-like growth that hang downward that people say, I guess, looks like boobs. Yep. And that's where it gets the name of ChiChi. Some people have tried to clean this up a little bit and spell it with TCHI, but it is CHI, which is Spanish, and easily to be able to translate it. It is a upright male, dense compact form, great yellow fall color, but it gives you that bark interest during the winter months as well. It is a really fun ginkgo that many people love.
Okay, now we're getting into the top 10, and I'll tell you what, looking at these top 10, I mean, there's some on here like, oh, okay, I expect those to be there, but there's some that I didn't I expect them to be even higher, and I'm guessing that's because they just weren't available as much. But coming in at number 10, we have Troll.
Yeah, Troll is a very fun witch's broom selection. It was a selection by David Bomer's family, very slow growing. It was found as a witch's broom, and it's one of those selections that I love. I mean, it's a competitor out there to Maric and some of the other dwarf selections, but it stays really slow, dense, compact. I think Corbin may have featured this in his mythological video before. You have to go check out him dressed up as a wizard. That's quite entertaining on our YouTube channel. We put out daily YouTube videos, by the way, for all of our listeners on your podcast platforms. Make sure you find the MrMaple Show on YouTube as well. Make sure you're subscribed. And we definitely put out some fun ones from time to time, including some costumes very rarely, but every once in a while we get a costume out.
Yeah, Troll, that was, I mean, I think for a dwarf, it's probably one of the more of the dense of them, but it's such a great name. Like when you see Troll and then you hear the name of it, it's almost like a light bulb goes off in your head and you're like, that makes complete sense why that's called a Troll. Great tree.
Yeah, I mean, it stays very dense, compact, fits in a lot of spaces. It's everything you love about the large ginkgo trees, but in a small, compact form. So you get that green leaf, you get some amazing yellow fall color. It's drought tolerant, heat tolerant, pollution tolerant, like I mentioned before with many of the other ginkgos. And it stays in a small, compact shape, making it great for containers.
Okay, coming in at number 9, we have Ginkgo Baloba Saratoga. I really like this one because the heavily dissected leaves that it has for a ginkgo. Most of these ginkgos don't have heavily dissected leaves, but this one does.
I mean, ginkgos have that common name of the Maiden Hair tree. And when I think of Maiden Hair, I think of like the Maiden Hair fern. And of all the ginkgos, this has the leaf that looks the most like the Maiden Hair fern. And the older growth looks more like that Maiden Hair fern. The new growth is heavily dissected like you were talking about. And it just stands out with unique texture on the leaves itself. It's a nice upright male form, though, with a unique, interesting leaf, which is different than many of the other ginkgo trees. And you're wondering, how did they find this selection? And it was created by the California, Saratoga, California research station. And you wonder, was there chemicals or something involved to create such a unique leaf shape with unique leaf morphology on a ginkgo tree? I mean, we've seen it with jagged jade. You see some small leaf forms, but most of the leaves look very similar to each other. Besides, variegation, it's unusual to get a leaf shape that is different. And this one truly has a different leaf shape than many of the other selections.
Okay, coming in at number 8, we have Ginkgo Biloba Gnome.
Now, gnome is a slow-growing form that was actually found in Tennessee as a chance seedling, which is very unusual because it has the shape and form of many of the ginkgo trees that were found as witches' brooms. So it has that dense, slow-growing habit, and it's, a great companion out there to something like troll, so you can have your troll and your gnome in your garden.
And I think the gnome made an appearance in that same video as the troll as well.
Yeah, gnome, dense, compact form, great yellow fall color. I'd say troll and gnome are very competitors in their sizes and their shapes. Very similar. We've got them planted at Hillstone Arboretum right at the gate, and you can really see how they're very similar in their structure, both extremely slow growing. Ginkgos, the more sunlight you give them, though, they can get established a little bit quicker in the landscape.
Okay, moving right along, coming in at number 7, we have Ginkgo Biloba Fulker Select.
Now, this is a small leaf, narrow, upright male ginkgo selection that gives an interesting texture in the landscape. It's a little slower growing than some of the others. The leaf is slightly a little bit different. It has almost a little bit of that jagged jade kind of thing going on to it on a smaller leaf. And it is starkly different than any of the other ginkgo trees because of its leaf structure and its small upright habit.
Yeah, those incised leaves, I mean, it's just a killer tree. And I'm actually quite surprised. Fulker Select, I'm quite surprised it's all the way down at number 7. That's one that I would expect to be way higher on that list.
I mean, I'd expect it to be somewhere around maybe 15 for me. It is shocking to me to see it up there all the way as high as number 7. And it's a collector plant. It's one that everyone chases after. I have seen it missold out in the nursery trade as Cultivars Select. So if you see it out there as Cultivars Select, the correct name is Fulker Select. It's one that made its way to the United States about 7 or 8 years ago and is really starting to become more mainstream. And I think it may just be growing more in popularity the more people actually learn about Fulker Select itself.
Okay, coming in at number 6, we have Ginkgo Baloba Grindstone, one of the more narrow columnar trees.
Now, a few years ago, my wife was saying I needed to take off. And so I said, why don't we take off and go up to Ohio to the Dawes Arboretum, and then we'll go around and check out some cool ginkgos along the way. And we tracked down the original Ginkgo Baloba Grindstone. Now, Ginkgo Baloba Grindstone is a tree that is at the Fly exit in Fly, Ohio. And there's a grindstone right there at the exit. And it's just this beautiful grindstone. And that's where it got its name of Ginkgo Baloba Grindstone. Now, this tree has been trademarked underneath another name and is marketed by some of our friends under a different name. Grindstone was the original name on it. It has a really nice, narrow, upright form. The interesting thing about Grindstone is there were actually about 6, if I remember right. You can go check out the cultivar breakdown we have on Grindstone on our YouTube channel. There are about 6 to 7 different narrow ginkgos at this just rest stop along the side of the road. And it was cool because I actually called our friend that introduced Grindstone and said, hey, which one is the original Grindstone? Got him to show me which one was the exact one that was the original. And we shot the video showing all the different trees there and seeing their narrow shapes, but the one that had the very best form, that's the one that got the cultivar status.
Okay, now we're heading into those top 5. So if you're out there, start thinking about maybe what that number 1 is. If you have guesses, throw them in there in the live chat. Let us know what you think in the comments. Coming in at number 5, we have Beijing Gold.
Oh man, Beijing Gold. This is one of my favorite ginkgos, and it's a variegated ginkgo that is very stable. Sometimes during the spring, you don't see as much of the actual variegation on the leaf, but in the springtime, with sunlight, it can get a yellow across the entire leaf on certain years. Some years it hasn't shown it, and then the next year you just get some amazing colors of yellow. And the entire leaf is yellow in the early spring, and then green starts coming from the stem of the leaf and sort of pushing the yellow out. And so by like mid to late spring, you get some of the craziest colors on Beijing Gold. But that's not really the variegation that you think about with Beijing Gold. Midsummer, you get some variegation that's white striping on the new growth. And so it's one that is very different and puts on a lot of different colors than what we've ever seen with ginkgos.
That's what I like about this one. I almost think of this like we talk about the firefly being a Japanese maple that's always changing all season long. And if there was a ginkgo that was like that was changing all season long, here you go. You've got Beijing Gold.
Now, coming in at number 4 is one that's shocking to me because it was probably very high. Like I'm talking like last year was probably in the 20s. And it's all the way down here to number 4, and that's Ginkgo Baloba Weeping Wonder. It's probably because it's never came off our website this year. We had it in large numbers here at Mr. Maple. It is basically a lace leaf form of a weeping ginkgo tree.
That's what's cool about it. Well, it's a dwarf, but then you get those thread-like, and then those leaves that almost curl at the same time at the different ages of those leaves. Again, one of those that's kind of changing, forever changing the time of year and the age of the leaves. Just a killer tree. I
mean, you get with Weeping Wonder, you can get some regular ginkgo leaves on this weeping selection. You can get some thread-like foliage that is really looks like a thread of a ginkgo leaf. And then you can get some leaves that are very tube-like. And some people describe them as like wine glass-like. They look like little wine glasses out there. And it gives you everything you love about ginkgos, hardy as all get out, but can still give you some amazing yellow fall color in a dense, small, compact weeping form. We have seen Weeping Wonder under the name Mutant Weeper. I've seen it under some similar selections, like Chernobyl and some other. There's a few other ones that came from Europe. And this one is by far one of the most interesting selections. It's a wonder of the ginkgos, and it's weeping, y'all. Ginkgo Baloba Weeping Wonder coming at number 4.
Okay, coming in at number 3, we have Ginkgo Baloba, Spring Grove.
Spring Grove is a witch's broom that was found in Illinois at Spring Grove Arboretum and Cemetery. Now, Spring Grove Arboretum and Cemetery, there's a line of ginkgo trees all across the Arboretum and Cemetery, and it's just tons of unique ginkgos, or I say unique, lots of seedling ginkgos everywhere. And some of them have developed witch's brooms. Now, Jehoshaphat, which was on our list last year, didn't even make it into the top 25 this year. And it is another witch's broom that was found at Spring Grove, just like Spring Grove is. But Spring Grove has a really nice, dense, compact form and can get almost like a Christmas tree kind of style to its growth.
I also like this because you talk about those leaf forms, and the leaves on this one, they almost kind of cup upwards, which gives it a really, really interesting look.
Yeah, I mean, you find that on some of the other witch's brooms, like Gnome. I guess Gnome was a seedling, and Troll. And it has to have that curling upwards form. But we typically get a little bit of a ball shape at an early age with Spring Grove, but it develops a central leader and gives a unique sort of, almost Carpinus columnar nana kind of look to it. That really nice miniature conical form, which makes it a really interesting shape to put out there in the garden, especially with a ginkgo tree with that unique leaf, that unique texture, and that good yellow fall color.
Okay, speaking of fall color, coming in at number 2, we have Ginkgo Biloba, Autumn Gold.
This is the most popular, for good reason, upright male ginkgo selection. It actually originates at the University of North Carolina, go Tar Heels. I used to walk on campus every single day past the original Autumn Gold, and it's a selection that just has a phenomenal form and some great yellow fall color. Autumn Gold, I mean, it's everything you love about an upright male ginkgo selection.
And it's no surprise that it's coming in at number 2.
No, I mean, everyone loves ginkgos. They're a tree that have been celebrated worldwide. I think Europe is often on the gardening trends in front of us. Matt originally saw a lot of these really unique ginkgos in Europe whenever he was visiting the Maple Society meeting, and I was still in school. And he said, Tim, we've got to be producing many of these cool, rare ginkgos. Well, we jumped on the bandwagon and started producing it. And we were probably leading a lot of people here in the United States, but we're just following the trend that we saw in Europe. And people love it. And then when we went to Japan, we went to this place called Icho Namaki, which is Ginkgo Avenue. And we did a full video on our YouTube show talking about that, where you can actually see these ginkgos just heavily manicured, just used as street trees. But when they go to the yellow fall color, people come out and celebrate and have parties. They block the streets off for, 15 minutes at a time. Then they let traffic through. Everyone jumps out of the way. The party ends for a minute and moves over to the side of the road. And then they close the road back off. Everyone's back out partying again, taking photos with their pets, out there dancing, doing TikToks and YouTube videos. I mean, it was insane. Literally, we saw people doing party rock dances and recording it in front of the yellow fall color, and the ginkgos manicured so well. And that's what Autumn Gold does. It gives you that perfect upright male structure out there in the landscape, non-fruiting, and that amazing school bus yellow fall color.
Okay, here we go into number 1, Ginkgo Biloba American.
Yeah, I mean, we often call it American, but it's actually, I think it's Moroccan, which is a Dutch woman's name. It's Piet Vergelt who introduced Peve Minaret. We'll start talking about some of the maples with Peve Stanley, Peve Ollie, Peve Starfish, which many of y'all may have. American is his selection named after his wife. It's one of the few selections he didn't put Peve, which means Piet Vergelt, in front of. Dense, compact witch's broom found on a ginkgo. And it is one of the slower growing selections. It was won the Conifer of the Year with the North American Conifer Society, with the ACS, American Conifer Society. It is amazing, easy to grow, and it's one of the densest, most compact forms of any of the ginkgos.
Yeah, 2.5 foot by 3 foot in 10 years. Again, perfect for containers, perfect for those smaller spaces in your garden. You're going to get those ginkgo fall colors. And looking at it, really, I would say that's probably the one that I was not surprised that came in at number one.
I mean, it's one of our most popular selections every year is Ginkgo Biloba American. Now, we have noticed that some of the dwarfs like this, if they're grafted on a standard, while that doesn't always affect the height of a Japanese maple, the overall height, I think it affects some of the ginkgos. I've seen some American that were grafted to, about 3 to 4 feet up, and they created much bigger specimens in the landscape, and then people were able to graft off of those back onto, smaller root systems and have dense compact dwarfs again. So it's real interesting how that might affect a ginkgo tree where it wouldn't affect a maple. It'd be interesting to see some of those studies done. But American is one of those trees that's easy to grow. It fits in so many spaces because of its small compact habit. And it's everything you love about that autumn gold. It's a male form. It's got some of those beautiful ginkgo leaves. It's got that health benefit in the leaf itself where you can turn it into ginkgo tea. But it fits in that smaller space. And I think as gardens continue to shrink, the landscape continues to shrink. People don't have 10 acres to plant many days. Many times they're gardening on a third or a quarter of an acre. And with American, you can add a unique ornamental tree with some great fall color.
Hey guys, these are your top 25 ginkgos of 2024. We thank you for tuning in, checking us out. We thank you for, putting this list together. This wasn't our choices. This was all their choices.
And if you love videos about ginkgos, we've got a few other ones on the MrMaple Show on YouTube you can go check out. Now, if you love gardening and you love ginkgos, make sure you're subscribed here on your favorite podcast platform, the MrMaple Show. When these air on Saturday, the following day, that's the Sunday at 8 p.m., they air on our YouTube channel, the MrMaple Show. Make sure you're subscribed there as well. There's actually a photo component that's in the video, so you can see what many of these ginkgo trees we're talking about look like.
Take care.
God bless.
Have a great day.